quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the North Carolina Broadcast Legends Production Fund, including contributions from the following. For a complete list of project funders, go to unctv.org/nclegends.
Welcome to North Carolina Broadcast Legends, featuring industry leaders sharing stories from the rich and significant history of the broadcasting business here in our state. I'm your host, Mike Weeks. Robert Lyndon Harper is a North Carolina broadcast legend. His story has humble beginnings on a farm near the village of Leggett in Edgecombe County. He worked with his dad raising tobacco, graduating from Rocky Mount High School. After high school, he got a job weighing tobacco at the Clark Tobacco Warehouse. He also worked at the Rocky Mount Airport in the off-season, where the pay was low, but he got free flying lessons and obtained his pilot's license. At age 19, Bob joined the Army, where he served in Korea. One weekend while on leave in Tokyo, he decided to record an acetate record to send a personal message home to his family. When Bob returned to the barracks, he played the record before sending it to hear what he sounded like. One of his Army buddies said, "Bob, you've got a radio voice," and that notion stuck with him. After the Army, he enrolled at East Carolina Teachers College with the goal of becoming a history teacher. He also went to the local radio station, applied, and got a part-time job as an announcer to help support his family while attending college. And that was the beginning of his career in broadcasting. It's not only where our story begins, but the story of a large group of North Carolina broadcasters owning and operating small-town radio stations in dozens of communities across our state. Bob Harper is past president of the North Carolina Association of Broadcasters and a recipient of NCAB's Distinguished Service Award. Bob Harper, welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, and we want to start where we talked about in the intro. You grew up on a small farm, and your parents wanted you to go to college.
Yes, they wanted me to go to college right after high school, but I felt like I wasn't ready. And a friend of mine, his parents insisted that he go to college, and he managed to flunk out of 2 colleges in 1 year. So apparently I made the right decision. So instead, I went into the Army.
Yeah. And before that, though, you spent a couple of years working and you got a job weighing tobacco. Now, for people that aren't familiar with the tobacco business in those days, what happened was once the tobacco was harvested, it was graded and put into large bundles,
right,
and weighed, and then it was auctioned off. And your job was to
weigh the tobacco. You set it into a little booth, and they put the tobacco came in and it set on a weighing thing, and so you got the weight and wrote it down, and it was put on a ticket showing the buyers how much the tobacco weighed.
Because they'd pay by the pound.
Yes, and then it would later be graded, and so it would have the pounds and the grade of the tobacco in it.
Now, in the off-season, you couldn't weigh tobacco all year because that was a seasonal job. You got a job at the Rocky Mount Airport.
That's correct.
And you learned how to fly.
Yes, they paid me a very small salary, but they said we'll give you free flying lessons also if you'll work here with us. And so I got free flying lessons, and I think I soloed when I was 18 years old.
Wow, and that paid off for you later while you were in the Army, and I think that's an interesting story. Someone in the office told you that it looked like your number was going to come up, you were going to be drafted. And you went down and told them you wanted to be moved up on the list.
That's correct. A friend of mine went down. We wanted to go into service. We felt like we owed that to our nation to go into service, and I looked forward to the adventure of it too. I thought I'd learn something from it. It might be interesting to do. So we went down and told them put our name at the top of the list in the draft list, so we would be drafted immediately.
And the advantage to being drafted is you had 2 years of service.
That's right, two instead of 3.
Yeah, so if you enlisted, you would be in 3
right.
years. So you were deployed to Korea.
That's correct.
And you got some experience then working as a radio operator. So that was kind of your first taste of some different things. But in the intro, I tell an interesting story, and it might be something people aren't familiar with. While you were on leave in Tokyo, you made an acetate record. Tell us what an acetate is and how you do that.
Well, we saw a place while we were in Tokyo on our R&R leave. They call it rest and recuperation. And so we were on R&R leave, and we saw where you could record a record. That's like the old disc, the old large disc. And so a friend of mine, we went in there and recorded it, and so that we could send it back home. Got 2 copies so we could send it back home to our parents to listen to it and see that their sons were doing okay.
Well, that's great. And you played it when you got back.
Oh, yeah.
And somebody standing there thought, you know, you had a pretty good voice for that.
Well, they did. They listened to that and said, Bob, you have a radio voice.
Wow.
Well, that really didn't seem to mean anything to me at that time, but apparently you file it away back in your subconscious mind.
Well, after you got out of the Army, you came back home, and you enrolled. Well, you had 3 things that kind of happened at the same time. You got married.
Yep.
You enrolled in college.
Right.
You had a baby.
All within about a year's time there.
Wow, that's...
I got married, which now would not be... but back then, let's see, I was, my wife was 18 and I was 21.
Yeah.
Or 22.
Yeah, and you enrolled in college, and at that time it was
23.
East Carolina Teachers College.
That's correct.
Now East Carolina University.
That's correct.
And you wanted to be a history teacher.
I felt like at that time I enjoyed history and I read a lot of history, and I felt like that I thought I would like to, it would be good to be a history teacher.
But you had a family, and you needed a part-time job, so you went to the local radio station, and by gosh, you got a job as an announcer part-time.
That's correct. And they gave me a short audition, and apparently it went very well. And so after only about, I don't know, 30 minutes or so, they were ready for me to do some part-time announcer while I was in college.
My gosh, well, that turned out to be something good. You know, Bob, something else you told me I think is very interesting. You know, in addition to history, you took some creative writing classes at college. And I think you have an interesting comment about the skills it takes to be a broadcaster. A combination of creativity and someone also that can pay attention to detail. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, in college, I was interested in writing. And actually, when I was in service, I used to write some short stories and show them to some of my GIs, and they would read them and say, hey, this is pretty good or something. So I said, well, maybe I got some kind of talent for writing. So I wrote some short stories while I was in college, and I know one of them was published in the East Carolina publication.
Yes.
And then the second one may have been published, I don't know, but by the time I had finished college, I went straight through, went to summer school and all, so I actually finished college in 3 years, in about 3 years and 3 months. That was how long it took me.
Well, after you got out of college, you thought, well, I'll get a job as a teacher.
Yep. That's what my plan was try to be a history teacher. And so I went searching for a job at different high schools to get a job teaching history. And none of them were available anywhere near Tarboro or Rocky Mount, and I preferred to stay in that area if I could. And so not finding that, I had to come up with another plan.
So what did you do?
Well, my subconscious mind must have worked and said that they've said you had a radio voice, so perhaps you should look into whether you could get a job in radio broadcasting of some type. And so that's what made me go down to the local radio stations and ask them, do they have any openings for part-time work, preferably at night when I was still in college.
And your part-time job ended up being a full-time job after you got out.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's terrific. Now, let's tell people the station call letters, because I think they might be familiar with that.
Well, at that time, it was WCPS AM and WCPS FM.
Now, let's tell people about the AM. It was what we call a daytimer.
That's correct.
What does that mean to people that aren't in the business?
Well, the AM station that we had was a daytime only. So that means sun up to sundown.
Well, you have shorter days in the winter to broadcast.
Absolutely.
And longer days in the summer.
That's correct.
Because when the sun went down, you signed off.
You had to with the AM.
Yeah.
And the FM back then, we said it meant a couple of things. Frequency modulation, I believe, was a technical term. Forget money was the other term, because nobody had FM radios on the automobiles back at that time.
They weren't in the cars,
No. And so the owners kept the FM, and of course the FM broadcast exactly the same thing that the AM did at that time.
So it was simulcast. So you had the same signal, because people thought that maybe somewhere down the road there would be some value to FM stations.
Yes.
But at that time, in the late 50s, early 60s, it was...
FM was not a big thing.
Not a big thing. And let's also tell people, a prominent North Carolina family were the owners of this station in Tarboro, the Fountains.
Yes, sir. V.E. Fountain, and then his R.M. Fountain, his brother, and then a Congressman L.H. Fountain was also a minority owner.
Great. So it was a family operation, and you had been there and got a full-time job. You also did not only some announcing, but you got some experience in sales.
Yes, they wanted me to go into sales, and so I was assigned to sell out of town. And so I sold advertising in Rocky Mount, Wilson, Enfield, Scotland Neck, small towns, and in that. So apparently I was a pretty good salesman. So the sales volume for this radio station went up in that area.
Well, and the economy kind of got tough at that time in the early 60s.
We went into a kind of a recession in the early 60s during that time. And so things got a little bit tough. And so the owners of the radio station decided that they would check about what sales were doing pretty good and what sales were not doing so good, so that they could possibly see what they could do to make it better.
Business wasn't as good as they wanted, so guess what? They came in and started snooping around.
Well, that's so. They wanted to find out who was doing what when.
What sales were good, so hopefully they could captivate that. And they found you were doing pretty well.
Yeah, they checked my sales, and my out-of-town sales were every bit as good as they were, and perhaps up a little bit.
Well, that's terrific. Something else happened while you were there. You were the newest employee at the station, and a celebrity, a movie star, visited in Tarboro, and there was an opportunity for someone from the station to go and do an interview with Miss Joan Crawford. How did the station select the person that was going to do this interview?
Well, they came to all of us announcers or disc jockeys, I think we were still called announcers back then, and asked them what would they do if they went to interview Miss Crawford. And they said, well, you come back and tell us what you'll do. And so I took a break and went over to the library and went and looked up everything I could find about Miss Crawford, her background, her age, although I didn't want to bring that up on there. But everything I could find out about her until I had a pretty good idea about and what her plans for the future were, what had happened in the past. And so I think I was pretty well equipped. And so when I went back, and the general manager of the radio station had us guys go in and ask us how we would handle the interview. And most of the other guys said, well, you know, I'll say, how do you like Tarboro? When are you going back? Just 2 or 3 things. And when finally they asked me, I had fortunately made up this big list of knowledge about Miss Crawford, about her past, and what her plans for the future. And so with all that knowledge, it ended up I was picked to do the interview with Miss Crawford.
You were in fact, we've got a great picture that they're going to show of you with Joan Crawford with the WCPS call letters across the microphone, similar to the microphone sitting here on our table.
That's correct.
RCA ribbon mic, one of the great microphones in the business. And so you were the newest employee at the radio station, but you were given a very important job.
Well, I was very fortunate in being able to, I was movie buff back then, so I'd gone to a lot of movies, and I'd seen her in movies. And then with having the foresight to go down to the library and find out as much as I could about Miss Crawford, gave me an edge on being able to get the interview.
Wow. Well, let's go fast forward. We had mentioned just a little bit that the economy was not as good as it should be in the 60s.
Right.
The owners came in, kind of wondered if there were ways that they could improve, and some changes took place. The manager that was there left, and some opportunities opened up. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the manager left, and so they had. They got another manager who had been in sales and had no experience in management or anything, and was not really that good of a salesperson. But anyway, he was there, and so they promoted him to general manager. They said, well, temporary general manager to see how things work out.
Yeah.
And so apparently things didn't go so well, and my sales had held up good and out-of-town sales, and actually increased a little bit, and in-town sales had gone down. So then someone, I think they went to the program director and asked the program director, his name was Ed Conway, asked him would he like to be general manager. And he said no, that wasn't his type of thing. He didn't want to, but he recommended me.
Oh, good.
And so I was recommended to be general manager of the station, and so they hired me as a temporary general manager to see how things worked out.
Well, you'd only been at the station 18 months.
Pardon?
You'd only been there 18 months at that time.
That's correct.
Short period of time. And how old were you at that time?
26 years old.
26 years old, and now you're the general manager of WCPS AM and FM radio with studios in Tarboro.
That's correct.
Wow. That's pretty exciting.
Well, it was kind of exciting for me. It was the first stage in me getting to the point where I wanted to make radio broadcasting my career. I maybe had not completely made that decision at that point, but it was a big step forward.
Well, you were successful, and after a period of time, you decided that not only did you want to be the general manager, you would like to own part of the station.
That's right. I said, if this is going to be my full-time career, and I've reached a point that I felt like that I enjoyed radio broadcasting so much that I wish it would be my full-time career. But if that was going to be the case, I wanted to have some ownership. And I didn't want to be a minority owner.
Right.
And I wanted at least to be 50% owner.
So you approached the Fountains and said, I'd like to buy half the company.
Well, correct, and I did. And of course, the owner, Mr. V.E. Fountain, he says, well, I'll have to think about that. But in the meantime, after that, he went and talked to his two sons. That was Vint Fountain Jr. and Mac Fountain. And he says, well, what do y'all think about it? And they gave a little thinking about it, and they said, well, actually, one day we're going to inherit this, are we not? And he said, of course you are. And then they said, well, we do not want to have to be looking for new managers.
Yeah.
And when you get a manager and it doesn't work out, you got to go look for another one, et cetera, et cetera. And so we would rather that you sold half interest to Bob Harper. And so they made that decision. And so then I had to work out how to come up with enough money to buy half interest in the radio stations.
Well, you figured that out, and let's go down the road a little ways, because you saw a lot of opportunities, but those opportunities required some improvements in your physical facility. You needed a taller tower so your signal would go further and you could reach more communities, sell more advertising, increase your signal, and you approached the Fountains to you as partners, you 50% of the Fountain family, to borrow some money and to make those improvements. What happened?
Well, we needed about at least $300,000 or more, even at that time.
That was a lot of
It'd
money.
be a lot more money now than today's money. And so that was a lot of money we needed to raise. And so I had some rental property, and it was little small apartments and everything, but I had it paid for. So I sold all of that rental property, and I sold, I had a GI Bill thing that I gave up, and to get money out of that.
Some benefits from the service.
Yes, and I had to buy higher insurance, but I got cash out of all of this.
Yeah.
And I raised all the cash I possibly could, and when I came up and counted it all, I was $1,200 short. And so I said, where am I going to get the $1,200 from? Well, my dad was still living then out on the farm, and so I went out to him and told him what was going on and asked him, could he possibly loan me $1,200? And I says, but I insist on it be interest bearing, and I will pay you back so much a month plus interest. And he said, of course I will.
Great.
And so he loaned me $1,200, and that's how I was able to buy half interest in the Coastal Plains Broadcasting Company.
And then you did borrow additional money, and you did increase the facility. And but I want people to understand how small market radio stations work. You worked at that time. You played records.
Correct.
You had 2 turntables.
Correct.
And while one was playing, you'd cue the other one up, and someone manually switched them. And in those days, the announcer played the records. You also had an operator there switching the station.
Correct.
So a lot different today when it's kind of a one-man person. And the commercials, sometimes you read them live. Sometimes when tape came in, you read them in tape. But you saw big stations doing some things that you knew as a manager you needed to do. Remote broadcasts. I love the story you tell about how you did the interviews and the remote broadcasts at sporting events. Tell us how you did that. You went down to the local stadium. Walk us through some of that.
Well, some of it, the first ones, you know, we were in a farming community. And so farmers were interested in how the markets were, and for everything, tobacco, peanuts, cotton, livestock, and all that. So I would go to these places where the farmers were, and I'd carry a recorder. We couldn't get live broadcast, and it was out there in the middle of the country. So I would go and on the company car, and I'd have one of the guys that worked at our station also would be with me. Go out there, and with the portable tape recorder, we would interview the farmers and anyone else that was out there that we thought would be of interest to the farm listeners. And so they would record that, and then the other employee would run it back. He would get in the company car and run it back to the station so that they could put it on the air as a recording.
And you were recording another interview while the one that you just recorded was playing over the air.
Yeah.
And you kept doing that all morning with different people.
Yep.
So it sounded like you were live from the event.
Seemed like they almost thought we were live, but we were not.
And the same way at sporting events, you did the same thing. You had someone that brought the tapes back and forth, and you really created in the mind of listeners a great experience, just like they were there.
Well, tried to. We wanted people to feel like that everything was live, and that they had the sense that they were there. They knew what was going on.
The communities that you served, your license was in Tarboro, but you expanded. It opened other offices, Rocky Mount and some others. And eventually you found that the FM station, you wanted to upgrade that and change the format. What did you do?
Well, we managed to increase the power to the max. And so we got the power right on up to the top level on the FM radio station, and we separated them. And I wanted different call letters and a different logo for the FM radio station. I wanted for now there to be separated, and FM wouldn't mean forget money again, that we could really make some money with the FM.
Yeah.
And so I came up with the call letters WKTC, and I wanted to have a logo with it. And I remember in listening to radio stations, sometimes I'd listen to stations that when I was on a trip and listen to what was going on. And I remember one station had the call letters WOWO, and they call it Whoa Whoa Radio.
Whoa, whoa, radio.
So I tried to come up with some call letters that I could put a catchy name onto, also that people would remember. And so I came up with WKTC and decided to call it Katy Country.
Yeah.
And we did some research on what type of format we thought we would use. And at one time, I didn't like country music so well. But I did some research, and I started liking country music better. I did some research and found out that actually more people like country music than you really thought they did. Even some lawyers and doctors and everything, they didn't have to be good old country boys to like country music. And so I said, perhaps I will make the WKTC a country music station and call it Katy Country. And so that's what happened. And so we separated the programming then. WCPS continued with its format and WKTC with its format. So they had two radio stations then separate.
Well, we're running out of time, and it's a great story, and there's lots more that certainly people will be able to see because we did a long-form interview a long time ago, but one of the things about Katy Country is that station has survived, and today is a very vibrant and strong, powerful station, still operating, very much to your credit. If you'd like to learn more about today's guest, you can watch our long-form interview that we did a few weeks ago, and we have that on a website. You can stream it. It's at North Carolina Broadcast Legends, ncbroadcastlegends.com. That's on the screen, ncbroadcastlegends.com. Lots of great information, other interviews you did with celebrities, great information about how you operated the station. Fascinating information, Bob. And we would like to thank you for being our guest today, Bob Harper, and for sharing part of your story and the contributions that you've made to the great state of North Carolina in broadcasting. Please join us for another edition of North Carolina Broadcast Legends.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the North Carolina Broadcast Legends Production Fund, including contributions from the following: For a complete list of project funders, go to unctv.org/nclegends.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.